Okay, this isn't really a joke to start this review off with, but at one point I thought the subtitles said Purgle Gurgle, and I thought that was the funniest thing. Sadly, it wasn't actually the case, but I really want someone on the subtitle team to use the phrase Purgle Gurgle at some point in the next episode before the series ends, because I need that to actually be canon. Hello, interwebs! I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review of the penultimate episode of maybe the series, or at the very least, the first season of Star Wars Ahsoka. This one, Chapter 7, and I am going to stay spoiler-free right up front, but before we get into my actual discussion of the episode, I will say apologies first off that this review is going up a tad bit later than normal. I am actually currently traveling, which is why I'm not in my normal little set, and I'm actually sort of cuddled up in my sheets right now because I'm lying in bed after having just watched the episode. And also, weirdly enough, I am actually not in Washington D.C. For this review. There's a picture on the wall that says Washington D.C., but that's not where I am. I'm not going to reveal where I actually am, but that is a little bit weird. But at the end of the day, yes, I am traveling right now, so that's why this review is going up a little bit later than normal, and you're not getting my nice little set. And why this review may be a little bit less tight, because I'm not going to be able to have my full editing software like I normally do with all of this. So apologies on all those fronts, but I will be back to normal for the finale next week. So we're just going to have a nice little cozy review together for this penultimate episode. So staying spoiler-free right up front, I will say that I do think that this episode was weaker compared to the last few episodes of the series. The last 3 episodes of this show have all been pretty good to great to excellent in my mind. And while I don't think that this episode was bad, it really just felt kind of a little bit more standard. And I think because the last few episodes have been so great, you felt it a little bit more. And I'm really hoping that this was all just set up for what will hopefully be a strong finale. Because nothing in this episode I was outright upset by or thought it was like really horrible. There's nothing really to like get like super angry about or super critique, but nothing also either really stood out. And it felt more egregious compared to just the strengths of the last few episodes. Even though there were a few like kind of standout-ish moments, there were ones that felt a little bit flatter to me, but still didn't ring like hollow, just weren't as strong. And I think that's really all I can say without getting into some more specifics. So let's start talking some of those spoilers right now. We start off the episode with Hera going to face the New Republic senators, led by why am I blanking? Mon Mothma. And this scene kind of felt like the expected way that we would have a scene like this go, given all the setup that we had. You know, Hera stands in front of the senators and tries to defend herself, and there's one obstinate bureaucrat who's like, I'm gonna come after you, look, everything she says is ridiculous and self-aggrandizing. And it kind of goes to this ongoing thread we've seen between The Mandalorian and earlier episodes of the series of, the New Republic being this ineffectual bureaucracy, and it needs like strong heroes like Hera to come and save it. And so I always have a little bit of uncomfortability with those storylines. Not that I think it's bad to talk about the failing bureaucracy, but this idea of like, yes, we need the good, great heroes, the great men and women to come and save us from this bureaucratic failing system. And this sort of felt like a standard version of that. Didn't really interject anything new enough for me to really just not really to go against the grain of me not really loving that trope. And even more so, how the sort of scene ends and resolves itself felt a little bit, let's just say, at Leia ex machina, because it was nice to see C-3PO show up. I was like, oh, it's my boy 3PO. And it's clearly they're using 3PO because they sadly cannot get Leia back in, because sadly the actress passed away. So I understand why he's here, but it also felt a little convenient that, like, okay, we're gonna have Leia come in some way and just sort of save Hera. It felt a little convenient because we got a couple callouts to Leia earlier on in the series, but it didn't really feel natural, and I would have rathered Hera be able to sort of find her way out of the situation, or hell, Mon Mothma, who is a character who we do have here and we have had some setup with, and we even saw her recently in Andor, so it still felt like a little bit of an extension of that series to a degree, even though I know Leia was an Obi-Wan, but it feels kind of weirdly distant in terms of like her character being much younger in that series. That it would have felt a little bit more natural, and here just sort of feels like a nostalgic cameo for nostalgic cameo's sake, and it didn't really work as well, and I feel like that was sort of the weakest thing for me. But the next little bit that does have a little twinge of nostalgia, where we see Ahsoka training to a hologram of Anakin, I did actually like this little nostalgia bit. I could see an argument for it kind of undercutting Hayden Christensen's appearance earlier on in the season, as strong as it was. So to show him again feels like, oh, you're kind of just overusing him at this point. And I get that, but I do actually like this scene because it kind of still shows that like Ahsoka has kept keepsakes of him, is still thinking about him, and still wants to connect to him, and is trying to like reclaim this idea of him being a good master despite where he came. Now, I hope the series isn't trying to like paper over the fact that Anakin did become a fascist, because I do think that episode where we saw him a few episodes ago was like him coming to terms as like it through being a Force ghost of like, this is who I was, move beyond me, Anakin. You know how they said in The Last Jedi, like, failure, we are what they move beyond. Failure is the greatest teacher. So I like that note to end on. So I hope the show isn't being like, yeah, Hayden Christensen was great now, we've all forgiven him for everything he did, like the child murder and the genocide. Yeah, I hope that's not where they were going with that, but I did like Ahsoka thinking about this. This then led to this action sequence, so they arrive in the new galaxy, and we get the mines and the Purgles exploding. I'm like, oh, my poor Purgles, don't hurt them. I also always think like mines in space is weird. Like, unless you have a choke point, like a wormhole in Deep Space Nine, it feels like space is so big that it just feels weird to mine any part of it, because like, it's big. Space is really big, if you hadn't noticed. So it felt a little bit weird to mine this like specific spot, and I guess you could argue they know where the Purgles come in, but it just felt like a weird kind of bit. So this sort of leads to the standard chase sequences and all this stuff, and then we come back to Thrawn. And by the way, we have Enoch here, and I didn't realize that Enoch is played by my boy Amos himself, Wes Chatham. I love Wes Chatham from The Expanse. He is wonderful. So it's cool to, even though he's mostly just in a mask, and you hear his voice, it was always cool to know that he's there. Also, speaking of which, one of the Fates is Claudia Black, Aaron Sun herself. So yeah, we're getting all the fun little weird science fiction cameos here. Like, I love Claudia Black so much. I'm a huge Farscape and SG-1 fan, so it was nice to like, now that I hear it, I'm like, yep, that's definitely her. I didn't catch it last week. So all of those great. But I do really like Thrawn this episode, because we do see him starting to be that like sort of 4D chess master that we know him from the books. There was a lot of criticisms of how Dave Filoni wrote Thrawn compared to Timothy Zahn in the novels, especially in Rebels. And I definitely agree with that to a degree. I don't think it was as egregious. Like, there are people like, Dave Filoni's a shit and he can't write anything, you ruined Thrawn. I don't think it's that far, but I do think there is a distinction between like how sort of like Sherlockian Thrawn is, especially in the canon trilogy that Thrawn wrote. That really just feels like Thrawn is this very methodical person versus Dave Filoni. And so here we're starting to see a little bit more elements of that, of him being like, all right, well, we can sort of time this out. We can, use these specific resources at the specific time, make sure Balin comes here, and we can sort of work things out. And, or at the end of the episode, he's like, I see something that you don't, like we've got everything, all the cargo placed on here. Ahsoka has lost time. And he's sort of like thinking about how Ahsoka, having been trained by Anakin, because we know from the novels that Thrawn knew Anakin, both as Anakin and as Darth Vader. And I believe that Thrawn didn't say so, but I think he knew that Darth Vader was Anakin. I think that was hinted at in the second Thrawn book. And so, like, him using that knowledge to be able to inform himself of how Ahsoka works, even though they hadn't met, it felt like a good way to create a connection between characters that, to my mind, I don't think they met in Rebels. I might be misremembering. It's been a hot minute since I saw the show. So it was just a nice way to forge a connection there through some ancillary media. Again, it goes to the series being like, I feel like the people who have read like all the Thrawn books and watched Rebels will get a lot more out of these scenes than than like someone who hasn't. But for me, I was like, hell yes, this all works for me. It's great. I'm loving it. We then have the moments between Sabine and Ezra, and I still feel like, Sabine, you gotta tell Ezra what's going on, because I feel like you need to be moving. You gotta get getting back to the ship to try and escape this galaxy. Like, come on, Sabine. What are you gonna do, hang out with Ezra for the rest of your life? Maybe that's her goal, but it felt a little bit weird that they weren't talking about that. But I did like Ahsoka reaching out to Sabine and them having that bond, sort of showcasing that Sabine does have some Force sensitivity, and also showcasing they do have a bond together. I really loved that for them. But then this leading to the sort of chase and action sequence with Balin and Shin sort of going after all of them. And I thought this is a fairly standard action sequence for me. I did really like Balin talking to Shin and being like, you have a lot of ambition. You're very young. You want to go and join the Empire. You want to get that power. But for me, it's not something I really want anymore. Kind of going to his like wanting to end the cycles that we talked about last episode, and him sort of recognizing that his apprentice, is kind of has a different trajectory than him. I thought that was like an interesting dynamic for a master and apprentice that we really haven't seen before, even especially in the Sith, or gray Sith, I guess we'll call Balin. And so I thought that was just a cool little way for that to go, and Balin still being like he'll try and stop Ahsoka, and I like their fight stances. It wasn't as strong as episode 4, but I thought that was a decent enough fight. So it was just cool to see Balin being like, well, you know what? She's got away from me. I have more important things. I'm not invested in this anymore. Like him just like divesting himself of the whole situation was just, again, Balin remains the most interesting character of this whole series for me, and I'm very much here for everything that with him. And it just sucks that next episode will be probably the last episode we'll ever get with this character because of Ray Stevenson passing away. And maybe they'll recast him, but even if they do, Ray Stevenson has just brought so much to this role that I really love every single bit, because you see him doing so much, even with the few lines that he's given in this episode. And I really adore that. I did like during the fight sequences, the Noti like hiding away in like the little shells. I thought that was cute. And then Ezra using the Force and being like, I don't need my lightsaber. I'm used to doing this sort of thing. That was also interesting to me. And then seeing all of like Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra sort of all working together and being this like a good threat. And like Ahsoka at the end of this, trying to reach out to Shin, but Shin just sort of running away and saying, no, I'm not open to that. I'm not ready to be accepted by anyone else. Like she feeling maybe probably betrayed on all sides. So hopefully, I hope there's a good arc for Shin. Maybe she will come to more of the light side. I hope that she doesn't end dark. I think there could be an interesting way to sort of like rectify that character and sort of bring her to a good way. Like I think there's like you could do like an Asajj Ventress sort of arc with Shin, where Asajj Ventress sort of becomes more of a gray Jedi instead of a gray Sith. I think that'd be a really interesting arc for her. So hopefully we get something like that for her. I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that. The other last thing that I did really like about this episode, besides, oh, by the way, I should say, I loved Hugh Yang in this episode. He very much felt like he was channeling the Doctor, like David Tennant was channeling the Doctor in this episode, except for a Doctor that no one listens to. Like, the Doctor's always the one in charge, and so, like, what if the Doctor was not in charge and no one would actually listen to what he was having to say, and that just very much felt like what Hugh Yang was channeling this whole episode. I love that. But the final thing that I did like about this episode was, when Ahsoka does see Sabine again, there was a very standard way you could have taken that scene where Ahsoka just starts yelling. Sabine's like, how dare you have given them the map? How dare you have brought people here? You made the wrong choice. I like that they didn't go with like Ahsoka just immediately shaming Sabine. Instead, she sees Ezra and said, hey, we're having a reunion and getting to have a joyous moment. Like, that felt like the least expected version of that scene, and it felt very nice. And I really did like that. It felt like a very good and strong and unique note to end this episode out on, and I really enjoyed that. So, all in all, I think this was a fine episode. I have some critiques here and there, such as the Leia Ex Machina. But overall, I thought this was a fine episode and one that set us up, hopefully, for a very strong finale. But compared to the last 3 episodes of this show, I think it was a little bit weaker. So, good, but not great. But hopefully, it is setting things up for the future. So, that's my thoughts on the penultimate episode of this season, or perhaps the series of Star Wars Ahsoka, because I don't know if we're going to get more after this. So it's clearly, I think it's up in the air given the strike stuff, but also I think Dave Filoni is planning this to build to a movie that's going to be going on, so maybe it'll be a movie and not another season of Ahsoka next. We shall see, but I am very excited for it, given where we've been at in this series. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Do you have guesses where I am? Because it ain't Washington, D.C., and it ain't Los Angeles where I live right now. So take some guesses down below. I'm not going to tell you, but you can make some guesses, and let me know what you think of the episode. But beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.